What up, guys? KCRC Rock Bouncer here. Hopefully, see if that's recording real quick. Yeah. Alright, what up, guys? About to get out and play today here in a few. I figured, I've been having a couple of issues, though. The last 2 times I've been out, and that is my shocks are dry. That'll happen, especially with scale shocks. When I ran big bore shocks, like the Power Strokes or the Pro Spec shocks, which I preferred the Pro Specs personally, they didn't leak as much, but also they weren't as active, in my opinion. Now, I never bought the spare spring sets for them, and I think that would have made a huge difference if I would have done so. I don't know. What can you do? I am kind of thinking in the back of my mind about doing another 2.2 build, because I haven't had a 2.2 rig of my own in a long time. The only 2.2 rig I have here is my daughter's Wraith, and exactly like I just said, my daughter's. It's not mine. So I don't play with it, because if I start playing with it, then I'm going to want to continue to play with it and start turning into mine. I'm not going to do that. So I went ahead and I know I just made a sway bar video not too long ago, so I wasn't going to make another video and update it in that sense, because it didn't seem necessary. But as you can see, I've got my Vanquish anti-rock arms back on there. I went up to the hardware store and I bought some more music wire, which I think I was using 3/32, and I went ahead and bumped up to 1/8. Now I had to work down the entire each edge of the bar. I had to actually kind of mill it down a little bit, so to speak, and that way they would fit in these arms, because they were just a tad too big. Where am I at? Right here. It's right in front of me. I know it. So yeah, I had to mill it down a little bit, and then I ground a little edge in it in the middle, just to mess with how much the bar engages or doesn't engage. The bar by itself was extremely strong before notching it, so the notching is definitely necessary. I like the fact that the bar is bigger, because there's not play in the chassis now. There was play with the smaller bars. But yeah, this part ain't that special. Ain't taking a while. Figure I'll just show you guys how I do the back ones. I'm not gonna, usually I clean them up real good. I'm not gonna do that today. I don't think it's really necessary, because I'm gonna get out and get it dirty right away again. I will clean a little bit of it, but not too much. Now on the ball ends on these, because they don't, some Proline shocks come with them, some don't. I found just the axial plastic ball ends work great. They fit snug when you push them in, and they allow it to move, but there's no play in it, like side-to-side play, once it's on the vehicle. This one's probably stuck because it's got dirt in there around it. That'll happen. Alrighty. Yeah, these shocks are definitely dirty. I was having terrible luck with these shocks when I first got it, especially with the rear sway bar setup, because if you've seen in a lot of my older videos, I have 2 shocks set up on there. Well, what they don't tell you about the 2 shock setup is if your geometry is not exactly correct, the shocks will actually end up fighting each other through the travel, whether it be at the start, the middle, or the end, or even all the way through. They'll be fighting each other, because when I had 2 shocks on there, the way I tested this is I took all the springs off the shocks and had all 4 on there, and I sat there and moved it through the through the range of motion. And the reason I had to do that is because there's 2 mounting points, and then there's 2 points down here. Well, if I ran the same length shocks without fiddling with them, because like I had to change the ball ends on the inside shocks compared to the outside. So the outside shocks are actually longer because they follow a longer range of travel or range of motion than the inside ones do. And then also, if they're not lined up properly, just basically, I mean, you could feel that they were fighting each other, whether it be up and down or just side to side on each one. But once I took that off and just ran one, the suspension was so much freer. It was so much smoother, like drastically smoother. But the problem is I couldn't find any springs that would support the vehicle. So I ended up, I wasn't trying to remedy that necessarily. It was just kind of a frustration. I ended up just, running a ton of preload and just crimping the springs that came with. And they would work, but what they didn't do is, like with the vehicle sitting on the table, say it's at ride height, which is in the halfway in the range of motion of the articulation of the axle, I could actually compress the axle and let go, and it would push the chassis back up. That's what I was shooting to get with those springs that came with these. They just weren't strong enough, and they don't offer any other spring sets for these shocks. So long story short, Axial makes different strength springs, and I found these on some Axial shocks that I already had on hand, and I just threw them in there. Like I said, I wasn't necessarily searching for a fix. I didn't go and purchase any new springs or anything like that. Especially, I was pretty surprised. Some of the springs are like $8, $10 just for 2 springs. That's pretty crazy if you ask me. But yeah. So that was the biggest fix to my rear end, other than getting a proper sway bar set up on there, because it's been a trial. That's one main reason I had a dual shock set up. Oh jeez. There's no oil in that. I think it's dry. It needs oil. I don't care what people say, who the manufacturer is that says you don't need oil. You need oil, guys, in your shocks. You have to have oil. You have to. They don't dampen properly if you don't. This vehicle runs completely different when these are filled with oil as opposed to not. Now when they're not, they can take small bumps a little better because the dampening is not affecting it so much, but then again, when you take a big hit, your suspension bottoms out, and when it bottoms out, then the springs shoot the suspension back open when, because you land, and then it unloads after it lands for just a split second. Well, it allows the shocks to bounce the vehicle up off the ground. Well, with the oil in there, you'll jump up in the air, come down, land. Well, it'll dampen instead of just boom and then boom. It'll actually catch you, and then instead of the springs shooting you back up, they'll slowly shoot back up. Now that's where the tuning comes in. It's the spring sets and the oil, because not every oil setup is going to work for every situation. It's too bad it's, doesn't. It'd be nice if we could get some self-adjusting electromagnetic suspension setup on our RC cars, but that doesn't seem very practical. Yeah, damn. The oil in these has gotten so thick just because there's hardly any in it. Okay. It's kind of got into more of a talking video than I expected. I'm not trying to make a video like this, but that's what we're ending up with. I'm going to pause the video and move you. here in a different spot. See if that helps at all. And there's the shocks. Get oil out. Since it's cold out, I tend to run a thinner oil. When it's warmer out, I'll run thicker. About the highest I go during the summer is about 60. I do have some 80 weight here. I don't know why, but that's what I got. I am running 27.5 right now for these. Now, honestly, with these shocks being scale shocks and not taking the abuse or hits that big bore shock will take, but giving you the advantage of movement, these really could be filled every 2 or 3 runs out, probably. It's just, and you know, that's going to depend on how hard you're really working them, how heavy your vehicle is. Just like any other setup, all that stuff's going to make a difference. It seems to make a little bit more difference with this just because we're, you know, I don't know. You could go get a Traxxas Slash if you wanted to, an Ultimate, and do some super smooth hill killing. Or, you know, go up some sand piles with paddle tires that this vehicle wouldn't be able to go up. Unless it had, I guess, the right amount of power. But even then you get into the point of you get too much power, you start doing backflips. I don't know where I'm going with all this talking, but yeah. The scale shocks. The biggest advantage I've found, huge disadvantage, they leak. They're gonna leak. They're gonna spew oil out. They're gonna do it almost instantly, but they're gonna move, and they do work. Okay, so the way I fill it up is obviously I compressed it all the way, and as I started pouring in, I slowly open it up, not to get it to the bottom too fast, because you want the oil to be right on top of the piston as it hits the bottom, and even have a decent amount of oil, maybe that high, far past the piston. That way those air bubbles have a place to escape and not suck more air down in there. So now here's my little trick that I came up with, which isn't all that impressive, but it helps. When you don't have a bleeder screw on these, what I like to do, it's fully open, set the screw or the cap in there, and compress the shock, pushing oil out to fill that cap completely, and then start screwing it on. Make sure you got a towel below you while you're working, because you are gonna make a mess. Like I said, I didn't clean these 100%. Now, here's something that people get confused on or forget about. The shock is going to have the spring cup in there, and that takes up a certain amount, you know, so this is actually going to be open a little bit once this is fully tightened. If you try and push it up and tighten it all the way, it's not going to work. You're going to end up pushing out extra oil. What you need to be careful on these is these little rubber O-rings, especially because they like to push out really easily. So we're going to go real slow at this last little bit. You'll see the shaft start pushing out. And actually the shaft has to push out because the screw at the top of the shaft that holds the piston on is actually coming in contact with the cap. Or can come in contact with the cap. See that little bit of gap? There's going to be a little more than what that boot takes up. But that's alright because, like I said, these things are going to leak oil. So, I'll go ahead and tighten this thing up. There, actually, you know what? Damn it. I can't show you. Alright, so when it's fully filled, if you've done it properly, if you pull the shock open all the way and let go, it should suck in a little bit. Not a lot. Which it's a lot more noticeable with the big bore shocks. These ones are harder to get that to happen. Yeah. Oh yeah, this thing's going to leak almost instantly. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and let a little pressure out of it. Now this is where you start getting a tiny bit of air, but I would rather have air in there than too much oil. because with too much oil, if it pushes out really hard, it's going to break your seals. And I don't want a broken seal. There we go. It should actually, it might work better now. We'll see. It's tightened, so I'm going to pull it apart. With a little help, it starts moving up. Not quite perfect, but that'll do. So, okay, let me clean this little goop out right here. Yeah, this definitely needs to be done. There it is. So the spring will hold the vehicle up. The oil will take the dampening. What I like about it is that you don't have that thak. Like when it's empty and you let go of it, you'll hear the piston bottom out on the inside and just smack it. When they have oil, they don't do that because they're not supposed to do that. All right, guys. Well, that's it. KCRC Rack Bouncer out.